Fine by us, yeah. So obviously I have to remember what Mr. Chard says, and then come back to cross-examination of him.
Okay,
that's fine by us.
So over to you then, Mr.
Thank you, Madam. And again, just for clarity sake, Mr. Chard, of course, gives evidence on Greenbelt, but he also gives evidence on landscape character matters, even though not one of your main issues, something raised by the Rule 6 party rather than the council. So I was proposing, Madam, in evidence in chief, to actually have him speak through all of the issues, landscape as well as a green belt. Obviously, let us know if we're overdoing anything. You can obviously let us know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Mr. Chard. Then you tell us in your main proof of evidence on page 1 that you are Matthew Chard. You're a director of landscape planning and design at Stantec, formerly a partner at Barton Wilmore. You've got over 30 years of experience in townscape and landscape planning, design and environmental matters, everything from strategic scale, residential, commercial, mixed use, all sorts of schemes. And indeed, you tell us that you've dealt with sites within the Green Belt, OMBs, national parks, strategic and local gaps, and indeed other designations. Is all of that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Right, thank you very much. Take your written evidence as read, as the inspector's indicated, and I'll ask you some questions that flow out of it and also of the evidence of Mr. Reynolds that we heard from yesterday. And we'll do it first, if it's okay, character and appearance in general, so landscape and visual matters generally. And then after we've done with that, I'll ask you some questions about Greenbelt openness, Greenbelt purposes. So we'll do it in that order. So, starting at the beginning then, what's the nature of your involvement with this scheme? When did you or Barton Wilmore, as was, come to be involved?
So Barton Wilmore, as was, have been involved on this site for a considerable period of time, appointed in November 13, undertook a landscape and visual appraisal of the site, which informed the development framework document for the site, which was submitted in March 15, and then subsequently provided the LVIA that accompanied the 2020 planning application for the appeal site.
And as you approach the site in the first instance to undertake your LVIA, what strikes you as so far as its context goes? What's important?
Well, so in terms of LVIA, context is the key thing, really, and obviously the site in this instance is perceived in the context of the urban edge of Basildon and its associated infrastructure, including the A127 and its frequent fast-moving traffic, pylons and associated high-voltage cables. You've got Dunton Road and its associated traffic. You've then got, obviously, the residential built-up edge to the east with regard to Steeple View, and you've got Steeple View Farm along the western boundary, which is quite substantial in terms of its agricultural barn forms and silos. So it is a substantial built form along that western boundary. And then you've obviously got the rear garden boundaries of properties on the edge of the built up area along King's Road to the east. And then over and above that, you've obviously got some of the ribbon development to the north, which includes for the granary, Sellers Farm, Sellers Cottages, etc. So all of those features, ma'am, provide an urbanising influences or exert an urbanising influence over the appeal site, creating a greater relationship or affinity with the built-up edge, in my view, and an urban fringe appearance, rather than with the more open countryside, which extends to the north of Dunton Road and which is acknowledged within the Greenbelt study of 2013, where Dunton Road forms a definitive boundary, provides clear separation to where the countryside begins. That's on page 208, ma'am.
That's we don't need to turn it up now, document 8.46 that we looked at yesterday.
And then obviously beyond that, beyond the A127, you've got more recent residential development that's been built out, and all of that built up edge is seen within the views from the more elevated land to the northwest, which also includes for the prominent and quite dominant horizontal mass of the Ford Research and Engineering Centre.
Thank you
as well.
Hopefully most of that, maybe all of it, the inspector's seen herself from her walk around. What do you take then from the extensive evidence base that happily, and Chief, anyway, I'm not going to go through bit by bit with you and not ask you to go through bit by bit either, because there's loads of it and we've seen quite a lot of it already in some detail. It goes back to 2013 and almost every year something new comes out. What are the headlines so far as you're concerned with your landscape and your greenbelt hat on? What does that help us with so far as an assessment of the site now in the context of an appeal?
Well, in terms of the evidence base, which, as you say, is quite substantial, there's a number of things that are identified in the different documents, but all of which point to the fact that, having given careful consideration to the extensive evidence base, the local authority considered it was worth allocating as H9. The officer's recommendation in the committee report, despite the fact that there would be some landscape and visual effects, identified the fact that actually a larger allocation would create critical mass required to support infrastructure provision, and again supported the permission or the allocation of the site and this scheme not once but 3 times. The green belt topic paper, which we've talked about, CD 8.2, page 19, identifies the fact that there may be instances where harm to the green belt is necessitated by the need to secure sustainable development patterns, and therefore the 2017 green belt assessment, the more up-to-date one, needs to be considered alongside other components of the evidence. And then over and above that, as we went through yesterday on page 45 of that document of the topic paper, it was noted—
That's the one with the table for a site H9 that we went through. Yeah.
Yes, that it was noted that the site, when viewed in the landscape, is set against a pattern of development which extends further west, so the site and development of the site would not necessarily be out of context within its westwards extent, albeit that was dealing with not just H9 but also parcel 20. Mm-hmm. So therefore, in terms of greenbelt, the harm in relation to sprawl wouldn't be significant when viewed in the wider context, but would be considered harmful at a local level, and that there was already encroachment with regard to the ribbon development in terms of purpose 3, and over and above that, the development on this site would be less harmful in relation to the countryside than sites located in more rural locations. So therefore, it's acknowledged localised harm would arise. So those are the sort of headline figures really on that element.
So far as the role of the remaining green belt goes, we recall that, we don't need to turn it up now, the inspector's seen it several times, the assessment that you've just referred to tells us that the remaining green belt in this location and to the north will continue to function as currently in its purposes, which is something that the council's witness agreed with yesterday. What's your assessment of the relevance of that conclusion? Well,
I think it's very relevant because the function and role of the wider green belt would, as they say, still function, and I totally agree with that conclusion.
Okay, more of that anon. So that's the evidence base. Turning then to questions of character. So you've identified the context for the site. You've described what there is around it on every side, if you like. How would you then summarise its existing character for the inspector at the moment?
So effectively, in terms of its character at the moment, it's formed of 2 parcels of land, of agricultural land, which lies to the east and west of a central tree belt, which is to the south of Sellers Farm. The eastern parcel is well enclosed physically and visually by residential development that I've talked about to the east. The existing vegetation along the A127 to the south, the internal tree belt, and then Dunton Road to the north. And as I say, you've got the ribbon development to the north of both parcels that we're aware of. The western parcel, west of that central tree belt, is slightly more open in character, both to the A127 to the west, but is, as I said, well enclosed by the substantial built form at Steepleview Farm. And it's got a more open aspect. That's the difference to the northwest. with a public footpath following the western boundary in part to the southwest, but then it cuts through Steepleview Farm, so it's offset from the western boundary. And that's shown on my figure MDC4 site appraisal plan within my illustrative material.
Thank you. I'll ask you a little bit later about how the design of the scheme has responded to the differences between the east and the western extents of it that you've just described. But still on character for now, designations or indeed any allegation that it's a quote-unquote valued landscape within the meaning of the framework 174A. Are there any designations at all or recognitions of landscape value at any tier of policy, local, regional, national, whatever?
There's no national, regional or local landscape designations on the site or the wider area. In my view, it's not considered to therefore be of scenic quality. It doesn't demonstrate tranquility. It's not particularly remarkable. Its features and condition reflect its current agricultural use and function, and it doesn't contain any features of particular importance. And that's not contested by either the council or the Rule 6 party.
Just to drill down then, and again, we don't need to go into the detail of the LVIA because the inspector's got that, but just to give her the headlines so far as then ultimately where you land on things like value and sensitivity for the site, what are the headlines? So
that's identified in my proof, obviously, and we've effectively identified the sensitivity, the susceptibility, the value for both the landscape effects and the visual effects in my proof at pages 24 on landscape effects and on page 30, 31 on visual effects. And effectively, we've broken down the various constituent components in terms of the tree belt, hedgerows within the site, and then the character of the appeal site itself. We've got a medium to low sensitivity on the site itself in terms of the character of the site, and then of the surrounding landscape, a medium to low sensitivity, and that's all built up from understanding what the value is and the susceptibility is effectively. So in terms of the susceptibility, we're saying it's low to medium. So we split the site into the two parcels. Mm-hmm. And then we've got a low to medium value and a medium to low sensitivity effectively, with a magnitude of change at year one on the site itself of medium, providing a moderate adverse effect. That's on the site itself. Thank you.
And then moving out from the site itself, thinking about effects on the site itself, but then looking more widely too, what's the headline so far as landscape effects as we start with the site itself, but then look at a wider unit of geography?
Yeah, in terms of the surrounding landscape character, we're saying there's a minor adverse effect with a magnitude which is small. We've got, again, I've talked about the values and the susceptibilities. That's at year one, and then at year 15. We've got a negligible adverse effect on the wider landscape. So I suppose the headline is it's a limited and localised effect rather than a wider effect that's been asserted by the council.
Let's move on to the visual component of the LVIA analysis. Can I ask you first about the visual envelope, if you like, the areas from which views will be appreciable of the site, and I suppose with a particular on the topography of this area. What's your evidence to the inspector on that?
Well, I would be saying that it is a localised and limited visual envelope because of the topography, because of the you've got generally low-lying flat land on the site itself, and then it starts to rise up towards the north. But in combination with that, you've got extensive woodland cover and mature vegetation in the wider landscape, with surrounding built forms that effectively curtail views or channel views. And that's demonstrated within my site context photographs effectively, and can also be seen on my figure 1 or my figure 5. So you've got a relatively open prairie landscape, but in terms of to the north, but what you've got is localized hedgerows and clumps of woodland that effectively provide channeled views through to the western part of the site. And I suppose that's one key thing we should just be aware of, that when we talk about the site, Mr. Reynolds spoke about the site in its totality, that visually, and we'll get onto it more, you only see the western part of the site from the northwest. You don't see the entirety of the site.
Why don't you see it?
Because the eastern part is screened by vegetation, topography, and the intervening woodland, which some of which is associated with the plotlands to the north of the site, which is seen on my plans, and which effectively curtail those views in an oblique fashion towards the eastern part of the site.
Can I ask you, I suppose somewhat skipping ahead, but given that you've mentioned it a couple of times, this point about the distinction that you see between the eastern part of the site and the western part of the site, where there are these more open views. How has the scheme, and to what degree has the scheme sought to take that on board, if you like? What's been done, if anything, to respond to the differences between these two parts of the site?
Well, the landscape strategy, and that's shown on my MDC 6 illustrative material, demonstrates a clear and considered strategy to respect the openness and the concerns towards the northwest.
You just walk us through what the landscape strategy comprises.
So the landscape strategy overall deals with the retention, the reinforcement, and the enhancement of the existing perimeter and internal structural vegetation.
Sorry to interrupt you. So can you give me the core document reference for MD6?
So the core document reference is, I think it's 10.3.
It is his Appendix B. I don't know, that probably doesn't help, but yeah. 10.3.2. Yeah, so Appendix B has 6 MDC figures, and it's the last one of them that you've got in your mind. Right. I'll just let the inspector get there, and then you can just talk her through what it shows. Of course. Right, okay. MD6 then, so this should be site layout plan with western boundary treatment. That's the plan title, is it?
That's correct.
Right, so talk us through it. So you've talked, as you say, about these northwestern area, having these being more exposed to views from the north. Walk us through what this strategy comprises.
Yeah, so effectively, obviously, we're retaining boundary vegetation as much as possible, reinforcing and enhancing that with positive management. We're setting back built form from the northern frontage of the appeal site onto Dunton Road to reflect the setting of the adjacent residential properties and to provide a strong green frontage to Dunton Road through the use of tree belts and hedgerows. We've got a setback of approximately 15 metres to the first properties on both of the access roads. We're providing new footpath connections within the appeal site to contribute positively to the local footpath network. And then obviously we've got this provision of open space to provide amenity and recreation opportunities which aren't existing at present. So there's no public access on the site at present. So my view is that actually we're going to be creating opportunities for looking at views out that aren't permissible at present. And we are retaining the views towards the elevated land to the northwest of the Church of St Mary at Little Burstead through that considered design response in that northwestern area.
You just talk us through exactly what you mean by that. Which views are you retaining and why?
There was identified views towards the spire of the Church of St Mary at Little Burstead. That's to the northwest, and we've got this significant open space area. It's about 0.659 of a hectare, in that northwestern area, which allows for those open views to be maintained, which allows for an open transition to the western boundary and to the green belt, and which allows for a positive considered response to those concerns, to those views to the northwest. And we've got built form set back at its minimalist sort of extent, about 43 metres to the road that comes up by the car parking that you can see there, and then about 70 to 75 metres down to that first property, or sort of horizontal east-west line of properties. So you're set well back effectively. There's also a slight rise in the topography from the main road in any event at that point. So that's that area. And then as you come to the eastern side, you've got another large area with a suds basin, with again a sort of setback of about 87 metres to the road and the properties off Dunton Road. So effectively what we've got is a very well considered setback of built form from that northern frontage, with substantial green open space in two locations fronting onto Dunton Road, as well as setbacks of 15 metres or so to the properties on the access roads, all in character with adjacent residential development to the east. We've obviously got tree planting over and above what's existing to break up the massive built form and soften the edge of the development in views towards the appeal site. And then effectively we're just enhancing that landscape structure to reduce the perceived noise and visual effects of the A127 along the southern boundary that was mentioned yesterday, and which was in fact a very considered response to, in discussion with the local authority on what they wanted to see along that boundary. And indeed,
what did they want to see?
They wanted to have a considered response to the noise attenuation barrier, and to make sure that it was green and it would be softened effectively from the A127, which is what we've done. And the committee report actually refers to that with regard to, if I just take it there, Mom, we should know where we are.
Document 3.1, there was the first committee report.
Yes. It says at 5329 of CD 3.1.
Let's just get there. That's on PDF page 39.
So it basically says creation of a strong southern edge to the greenbelt through mitigation planting commensurate to the scale of development being proposed would be advocated. This can be accomplished by retaining a large proportion of the southern aspect as a structural landscape area, predominantly through woodland block belt planting of native species and the creation of an ecotone of native scrub, thicket and wildflower planting to assist the transition from built development to the busy A127 road. The provision of tree line boundaries and hedgerows to break up the built form of development would be advocated and secured by condition.
And just on a similar theme, just before you put the report away on the same sort of topic, just a few pages up, 5.3.9 and 10 on page 31. We went through this these paragraphs
and
yesterday.
Yes,
so we don't need to read them all out, but just have you? This is on PDF page 31.
Yes, I've got that. Yeah.
Any reflections on what officers are saying there?
Well, only the fact that it reinforces what we've done in terms of the provision of an ivy-clad acoustic fence along the southern boundary, providing instant greening and enclosure, and it should be installed at the earliest opportunity to benefit future residents. You know, the result is a high-quality designed scheme, effectively.
Right.
I think the only other thing I would mention, Mom, is that Mr. Reynolds talked about the southern boundary yesterday quite a lot, and he actually identifies the fact that he would expect to see the creation of a stronger southern edge to the greenbelt through mitigation planting commensurate to the scale of development being proposed. And that is on page 23 on the left-hand side, there's no para numbers, but the penultimate paragraph.
That's in his LVR, is it?
That's in his LVIR.
Okay. Now, almost done on the landscape character side, but just last question, really. I suppose it's more almost about design. It was suggested by Mr. Reynolds yesterday that one of the problems that he's got, and again I'm paraphrasing with the scheme, is that it's a shame. He said that it wasn't landscape led in its approach. It would have been better to have a scheme that was landscape led in the way that it's come forward. What's your response, I suppose, having been involved as you have been over the time that you've been involved with the scheme? How would you assess that proposition from the council?
I would totally disagree with that. I think it's clearly a landscape led approach that's clearly set out within the design and access statement as well. It's been a landscape-led approach from the outset because of its greenbelt identity, because of the character of the surrounding area. And, you know, as I said, we undertook a landscape and visual of the appraisal of the site, which informed the development framework document in 2015. So it's clearly landscape-led. And I think that the things that I've just spoken about, particularly with regard to the sensitive nature of the open spaces and where they're strategically located, and the retention of the central tree belt, and the way that we've designed the edges of the site, etc., to the various receptors, demonstrates it's a landscape-led approach.
Thank you. Changing tack. I'd like to move on to greenbelt matters, if that's all right. And within greenbelt matters, first to deal with openness, and then once we've done that, and under that, the spatial and the visual components of openness, as we did yesterday, Mr. Reynolds. And once we've done that, your assessment so far as greenbelt purposes go. So we'll do it in that way. So, firstly, then, just as a high level, how do the proposals affect, in your view, the spatial openness of the greenbelt, if you like, the spatial component of the greenbelt's openness? What's your evidence on that?
So, in terms of how the development affects the spatial openness, obviously, I acknowledge there would be a spatial loss of openness as a result of the introduction of proposed development on what is currently an open agricultural field. That's inevitable with any greenfield development. However, I would consider that any harm would be predominantly contained to the site itself and its immediate vicinity. At present, that perception of openness is restricted.
So can you slow down slightly?
Sorry. I'll look at your writing. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
the harm would be contained.
So it would be contained to the site itself and its immediate vicinity. The perception of openness at present is restricted to within the site and the immediate vicinity of the site. But I consider the sense of openness to be limited by the site's relationship with the existing built-up edge of Basildon and the containment afforded by both boundary vegetation and built form. So, in terms of the site itself, inevitably there would be a loss of agricultural land and a consequential loss of visual openness resulting from the replacement of that farmland with housing and new green space. That harm would mostly be perceptible along Dunton Road, i.e. in near distance views.
Where, in your view, is the site seen in a way that matters for this discussion about openness from within the greenbelt? And when it is seen as an area of the greenbelt, how is it perceived?
So it's seen from certain views to the northwest on the elevated land, and that intervisibility and the perception of loss of openness can be assessed through reference to certain viewpoints.
Are there any in particular that you want to show us?
Yes, so effectively it's site context photograph 12.
Direct us to
maybe I'll take them one by one, it's probably easier. So that's in the same, it's in CD 10.3.3.
Wonder if that, because it's your MDC5, it has all of, doesn't it have the context plan locations on? Is that right?
That's correct, it does.
And I wonder whether, do you want to just tell us, looking at that plan, maybe which ones you're going to take us to, so the inspector has a flavour for us. Find that again. So MDC5 is a plan with all the.
So there's five views, Mom, basically. There's number 12, 15, 17, 18 and 19.
So those are all the north to the sort of northwestern extent of the viewpoint. It's really the five northwesterly views on that map.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And where, in what appendix then would you like to take us? So I think it is.
And then if you go to 10.3.3.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's only coming up with one number on my header, but it's 10.3.3, Mom.
And is it, you've got an appendix C, which is summer photography, and appendix D, which is winter photography, I think.
Yes, so the summer photography is the most up-to-date photography that we've taken.
That's of this year. In
September, 26th of September.
Right.
And on the PDF, Mom, so context photograph 12 should be page 20, which might help you.
Right. Dear.
So that view is from public right-of-way 57. It's nearly a kilometre away and heads southwest from the churchyard towards Dunton Road. And again, you can see in the centre of the bottom photograph, which is an inset photograph, a triangle of sort of yellow colour, and that's the western part of the site effectively. Right. So the eastern parcel is screened, as I've mentioned before, by existing vegetation. The northern settlement edge of Basildon forms the backdrop to the appeal site, and you can clearly see on the right-hand side of that photograph, Ma'am, the Ford testing engineering centre that I was talking about earlier.
And so what reflections do you have on this then? You've described what you can see, but
so clearly you can see that, and obviously it would be better to see it and the experience on the site visit, Mum, if you've not already been to this viewpoint. But effectively, what you've got is the northwestern corner of the appeal site is visible, and you will see built form on the upper part of that field. You will have open space on the lower part of that field in the foreground, and effectively you'll be foreshortening the view of the backdrop of the built-up edge. So whilst perceptible, the harm to any perceived loss of openness, in my view, is not considered to be significant. The composition of the view doesn't necessarily change, either vertically or horizontally, because we're putting in two-storey built form, which is characteristic of the locality. So any harm to that openness is going to be limited through the backdrop and all the bits that I've talked about.
15 is slightly further afield, and it's a few pages on.
Further afield, but similar sort of composition of the view, similar angle in that you see that triangle of the western part of the site. Mm-hmm. That's on page 23, Ma'am. It's 1.2 kilometres distance nearly, and offers views looking south east towards the appeal site. And again, the eastern parcel screened by existing vegetation. The western parcel, as you walk along that footpath, is visible in certain locations, and so you can see that, and therefore, again, much like the previous one, the proposed development will form a component within the view, and the loss of openness will be perceptible, but it will also be offset by the open space that it's the foreground of the site, and the fact that the built form is offset quite considerably in some areas in terms of built form from Dunton Road in that northwestern corner. And over and above that, in the centre of the view on that lower inset photo, you can see the considerable development of Steeple Farm, and we won't be going any further west than that, so that contains that development, doesn't result in unrestricted sprawl in my view. So the northwestern corner overall will remain open with a substantial landscape buffer that's shown on my MDC6 that will address the Dunton Road frontage and help to soften and contain the remaining built form. And again, whilst perceptible based on that backdrop, the harm to any perceived loss of openness again is not considered to be significant.
17 was next on your list, and again we can see a couple of pages on, we can see that it's again sort of a similar-ish angle, but further away, heading up in the direction of Little Bursted.
Yeah, so these are specific views, but obviously there's a representative experience you get as you go through the landscape and the footpath, and therefore views open up and close down as you walk along these routes. But this is almost 1.7 kilometre away on public right-of-way 52, heading southwest from Little Bursted. And initially the appeal site is screened by the Church of St Mary and the surrounding vegetation, but as you move southeastwards, the western part of the appeal site is partially visible in views, but is framed by intervening vegetation. The appeal site is never visible in its entirety. And again, any proposed development or views of that would represent a very small change in land use, and any perceived loss of openness would be limited in my view.
The other two views that you referred to are 18 and 19. So 18 then.
Yeah, so I mean these are all similar, but all important to go and visit, Ma'am, on the site visit. So this is on PDF page 26, site context photograph 18. This is now at just over 2 kilometres away. And again, looking southeastwards through gaps in the roadside vegetation. And again, just demonstrates how the site is, the eastern part of the site is fully screened by the existing topography and vegetation. The western parcel is visible, but forms a very small component with the view, within the view. And the proposed development, whilst perceived, would be very small indeed, and would be probably imperceptible to users of the road, bearing in mind the existing settlement edge as a backdrop. And that's the key thing, really, that, you know, the users of the footpath already witnessed the full extent of the north-eastern settlement edge to Basildon, including the Dunton Technical Centre, the full technical centre. And as a result of that, given the urban backdrop of the view, any perceived change to the loss of openness is considered to be very limited again.
Finally then, 19.
19 is taken to the most extreme northwestern part on my figure MDC5. It's 2.19 kilometres away to the south of near to Botany Hill Farm. And it's, again, I mentioned about specific view. So this is a specific view. This is the worst case scenario, because representatively, you wouldn't see the site at all, because there's hedgerow running all the way along the length of this footpath, and you can just see that in the right hand side of the top photo. But effectively, in this instance, there's a gap in the vegetation following the footpath, which allows an open view towards the site. But again, the appeal site is only partially visible within the view. The eastern parcel, yet again, is screened in its totality.
Where is it?
So it is, if you drop down onto the lower inset photo.
Yeah.
In fact, I might have to point this to you. Did you see this bit of vegetation here, Rob?
Yeah,
See
I've got it.
Yeah. Steepleview Farm is the reference, literally right next to it.
Okay.
So you can see the
So
silos.
just next to that.
And the site is just a very small sliver. And it's always, in these photographs, identified by the sort of yellowish colour of the triangle. So again, composition of the view is not going to change. Western parcels visible forms a very small component within the view. It would probably be imperceptible to users of the footpath in terms of any significant change, and the loss would be very limited.
Could I ask you to just take a step back from the individual views that you've walked us through and this analysis of impact on the visual component of greenbelt openness? Does it make a difference when we are thinking about impacts on openness and purposes too, but we'll come to purposes in a moment. Does it make a difference whether you're thinking about the appeal site itself or some wider area of land?
Well, if you're looking at the site itself,
I mean, methodologically.
Oh, methodologically. Well, basically, I mean, the whole point about greenbelt is to ensure that there's a sense of separation, that there's identity to settlements, and that you've got openness there. But effectively, you're looking at it in the wider composition of the role of and the function of the greenbelt. You'll
remember yesterday when the local authority was giving its evidence through Mr. Reynolds, he confirmed that his approach to openness and purposes had not been, as you seem to have been doing, focusing on where the site is per se, but on this wider area 20 that we identified on the map yesterday, and I asked him about that. What are your reflections on that as a matter of approach?
Well, you should be looking at the site itself, because obviously if you're looking at a wider parcel, the contribution that the site makes to that parcel is going to be smaller, I would suggest, in terms of its contribution to greenbelt. If you're looking at a wider parcel, you're looking at a wider parcel which isn't as relevant because it's a far larger area. So you need to zoom down to then how the site contributes to those purposes and how the site contributes to openness as part of that wider parcel.
What are the risks of taking the approach of looking at a larger parcel if you're trying to understand what effects on greenbelt are? Why shouldn't one do it if it's your view that one shouldn't?
Well, if you're looking at the wider parcel, you are taking on board matters which may not be as relevant at a site-specific level. So a lot of the evidence base talks about parcel 20 or parcel 16. And it talks about, I mean, it's relevant to what we're saying because it deals with the context and the backdrop of the built up edge is seen in that context. But you really need to look at a site specific level.
And what have you done?
And we've looked at a site specific level, which is included within the LVIA, which was submitted for the application and a greenbelt review, and is included at a site-specific level within my proof.
Thank you. Enough on openness for now. Purposes then. So we know from the evidence yesterday that the extent of the authority's objection relates to 2 of the 5 greenbelt purposes. The first is the purpose of checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. That's i.e. purpose 1, but first purpose. So what's your analysis so far as that purpose goes?
In terms of purpose 1?
Yeah.
In terms of unrestricted sprawl.
That's the one. Purpose 1, unrestricted sprawl. What's your? That's the first one that the council relies on, and then in a moment I'll ask you about the third one, which is countryside encroachment.
Yes, so effectively in terms of sprawl, I'm saying that the appeal site is adjoined by built form and infrastructure in terms of the roads on all sides, and therefore is contained by that infrastructure and built form. And as a result of that, any development within the appeal site would therefore be within that existing structure in any event. there's clear precedent for development to the south of Dunton Road, as demonstrated by the residential neighbourhoods to the east of the appeal site, and that proposed development on the site would not result in the built form extending any further north or west than the current established limits. The boundaries of the site are robust and in terms of their physical features, and unrestricted sprawl would not occur and can be designed out as through the master planning process, which is what we've done effectively.
So overall, to what extent, if at all, do you identify harm associated with the first of the Greenbelt purposes, checking unrestricted sprawl?
So we say that it would be limited in terms of sprawl, limited to none effectively, because of those points that I've raised.
Thank you. The second purpose I won't ask you about. You do have some evidence on it, but it's not in dispute, so
yeah.
We'll pass on over it. The third purpose relates to the safeguarding of the countryside from encroachment. So in respect of this point about countryside encroachment, to what extent do you identify harm associated with that purpose?
So I say there's limited harm. There's already a perception of encroachment that exists locally due to the sort of urbanised context of the northwestern edge of Basildon and the Ribbon development. We've already got built form, as I've mentioned, at Steepleview and properties along Dunton Road, and as a result of its urban context and its location adjoining the A127, the appeal site has a greater relationship with the built-up edge than the open countryside to the north. The route of Dunton Road has not changed since 2013, and as a result of that, the appeal site makes a limited contribution to the purpose, and also the LPA evidence itself talks about that clear separation from the countryside where Dunton Road starts, and where there's a clear separation where the countryside begins in the 2013 Greenbelt study that we were referring to yesterday on page 209. It identifies the fact that Dunton Road now forms a more definitive boundary, and therefore there would be limited encroachment in my view, because built form was already existing.
Thank you. So we've looked at openness. We've looked at the two purposes that remain between you. I think that's more or less it to do in chief. There's just one more thing actually that I just wanted to get your view on in chief. You've also explained already the design of response and how that's dealt with, and so far as landscape character concerns, views out to the northwest. There was a particular issue that arose yesterday, and I just wanted to get your take on it. And it arose actually only in re-examination of Mr. Reynolds. So it was in re-examination, so I wasn't able to ask him about it. The only person I can ask is you. I suggested in questions to Mr. Reynolds that his proof of evidence was not site specific. It was area 20 rather than the appeal site. We went over that in respect of Greenbelt purposes and Greenbelt openness. Remember all those questions and answers yesterday? That was that. In re-examination, Ms. Ollie asked him something along the lines of, if the inspector's not satisfied that there's a sort of a site-specific analysis in the proof, where else can she go, if you like? Words to that effect. And the answer from Mr. Reynolds was, well, she can go to my LVR, which is just core document 8.45.
Yes.
The let's get the date, sorry. March 23 landscape and visual impact review that he produced.
Yes.
So a couple of questions then for you about that document. Firstly, I suppose, on what it does do in your view. What is the relevance or whatever? What are the key conclusions that you discern from the landscape and visual impact review that has been prepared by Mr. Reynolds? What do you draw the inspector's attention to, if anything?
So I would bring the inspector's attention to the fact that, as identified in the background and context introduction, on page 4, they were instructed to undertake a broad-scale landscape assessment of several sites. So it's a review of our LVIA. It is not a landscape and visual impact assessment. It is only site-specific to the tune of referencing back to our own LVIA. There are no references to greenbelt or openness in that document whatsoever, apart from the evidence-based documents, the greenbelt reviews. Mr. Reynolds hasn't undertaken a greenbelt assessment himself or identified how it contributes to the purposes of the greenbelt, or how it affects the perception or the loss of perception in terms of openness within that document. Just
to try and be as clear as we can about it, to explain what your view is about what's in here. Just for example, if you just turn to page 10 of it, if we can get it up, so it's called document 8.45.
Yes.
Just let the inspector get it, and then I'll ask you something about it. When you're there, inspector, let me know. It says page 10.
Yes.
Oh no. Got a hard copy. Any joy? So it's 8.45, page 10, PDF page 10 as well. Lovely. Page 10, there's a heading, Basildon Borough Greenbelt Review 2017.
Yes.
And then there's a reference to the site lies within parcel 20, sets out some of the purposes, and then goes into parcel 20 does this in respect of purpose 1 over the page, parcel 20 does that in respect of purpose 2, parcel 20, etc. So my question is do you discern in this document, you've obviously read it,
yes,
do you discern in it not a parcel specific determination of impacts in respect of greenbelt purposes, but an appeal site specific assessment? Has that been done as part of this landscape and visual impact review exercise?
I would say not. No, it's referring to parcel 20. The last or penultimate paragraph, I suppose, on page 11 talks about following the site visit. It is noted that although the site is located, that is all to do with character, because at the end of that paragraph it identifies the fact it's a peri-rural character with substantial urbanising influences. So basically what Mr. Reynolds has done is he's looked at the 2017 Greenbelt Review, he's identified within this text, within those paragraphs, what that document says, and it is about parcel 20. It is not site specific. And
just on that character point, do you agree or disagree with the description of a peri-rural character with substantial urbanising influences? Is that fair enough?
I'd probably say it's peri-urban rather than peri-rural, but yeah, we're splitting hairs a bit. It is effectively urban fringe. I think that's what I read from it. It's not fully rural, and it's got substantial urbanising influences. And Mr. Reynolds, you know, within his LVIA talks about detracting features, to be fair, within the document, and acknowledges that effectively development can be accommodated not only on the eastern part of the site but also on the western part of the site with mitigation.
And so overall, oh, sorry, go on.
So all I was going to say really
Please
was,
do, sorry.
I mean, I could go through all of it if you wanted me
No,
to.
not
but I
all of
don't
it.
want me
Just
to,
in
but
terms of key headline
but,
conclusions,
yeah.
what do you ask the inspector to draw out of it?
I would pick up on the fact that there are detracting features which are identified on page 8 on the second paragraph down on the left hand side, which is what I've already I think that's common ground with us basically. The fact that the conclusion, let me just go back up a minute because yeah, I think what's interesting is that on page 16, the LVIA review, this is going back to landscape and visual elements really, talks about the fact that the site has a medium to high susceptibility.
Mm-hmm.
So that's about the vulnerability of the site to accommodate the type of development.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an overstatement there because he then says a number of residential dwellings could likely assimilate within the landscape surroundings with appropriate landscape mitigation.
Where are you reading from there? Sorry.
So sorry, this is, let me just find.
Is it pages 22 and 23 on his conclusions and recommendations? Don't know. The reference there to the phrase could likely assimilate, top of page 23 on the left hand side.
Oh, I should have written down the reference, shouldn't I? I haven't. Page 16, let's have a look. I think it's there.
Oh, could assimilate. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
you're right.
there,
absolutely.
that's...
Last bit of page 16. Thank you. So yeah. So what do you take away from that then?
Well, I take away the fact that despite his concerns, the site is capable of accommodating development without unacceptable effects. And it says in line with the council's own findings, and that's on that page 16, Ron, on the on the fourth paragraph down, actually, on the left-hand side.
Mm-hmm.
We also agree that development in this location could form an appropriate extension to steeple view to form a stronger edge to the green belt. And then it says at the end, as you mentioned, that the easternmost part of the studio is generally able to accommodate development without suffering detrimental effects on its character, and the western portion could also assimilate residential dwellings with appropriate landscape mitigation in place, which says to me the susceptibility is incorrect in his findings because it can accommodate the type of development because it is in character with the surrounding area. We're not putting in anything that is not uncharacteristic of what's already existing. And although the appeal scheme will change the character and appearance of the site, it does not translate to being or resulting in unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the surrounding area.
Mr. Chard, thank you very much, Madam. Those are the questions in chief.
Thank you. Ms. Ollie, I think we're going to pause there then. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
I've got some plans to hand in. I just wanted to before you close.
oh yeah. Did the council get those photographs copied? Who's copying
no.
those?
So, these are some of the plans that are hopefully all the plans anyway that are referred to. We can talk you through them at the highways at the round table session, or indeed if you prefer we could also talk you through them tomorrow, Mr. Wharton's evidence in chief, just so you know what.
These are the 106 plans.
Exactly. Sorry, yeah, I should have said that they're the 106 plans that identify where particular works are happening that are referred to in the body of the 106.
Okay, and who was copying the photographs?
It was the council.
Did they get passed to us? I think, sorry.
Not at the moment, I believe.
Yeah, you could give them to us.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so that concludes the discussion for today then, and we shall be back at 9. Everybody can tell me 9:30. Yeah, so
Yep.
9:30 to resume with Mr. Chard. Okay, so the inquiry's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.